I was 28 years old the night my brother stood up at his rehearsal dinner and made me the punchline of a 5-minute toast. Not a gentle joke between siblings. Not the kind of ribbing that stings a little and then gets laughed off over dessert. He held a microphone in front of 60 people, his fiance's entire family, their college friends, his coworkers, our relatives, and delivered a bit he had clearly rehearsed about how his older sister had spent the last 4 years playing pretend accountant on her laptop while their parents quietly covered her bills. The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then people laughed, because when the groom is charming and confident and holding a microphone, the room follows him anywhere he points. I sat very still. I picked up my water glass. I did not look at my mother, who was smiling in that tight, complicated way she has when she doesn't know which version of the story to commit to. I did not look at my father, who was clapping. I took out my phone under the table and opened my notes app, and I started writing down every name I could see laughing. Because 9 days later, those same people were going to watch everything fall apart, and I needed to remember exactly who had been in the room when it started. Before I tell you what happened at that rehearsal dinner and what I did 9 days after it, I want to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this reaches. My name is not important to the story. What matters is what I did for 4 years that my brother called pretend. I had started a bookkeeping and financial operations firm when I was 24. It grew slowly at first. A yoga studio owner who needed her quarterly taxes organized, a food truck operator drowning in mismatched receipts, a small dental practice that had been misclassifying contractor payments for 2 years. I worked from a converted spare bedroom in my apartment with 2 monitors, a standing desk I'd assembled myself, and a whiteboard covered in client timelines that I photographed every Sunday so I'd have a record if anything shifted during the week. By 28, I had 11 ongoing clients, a part-time bookkeeper working under my LLC, and a waiting list. My income was not flashy. It was not the kind of number that makes people gasp at dinner parties, but it was entirely mine, entirely clean, and growing at a rate that meant I could see exactly where I'd be in 5 years if I kept going. My family had decided early on that none of this was real. Part of it was that my brother, Colton, had taken a different path. Sales manager at a logistics company car, an office with his name on a placard, a salary with benefits and a 401k match, the whole architecture of legitimacy our parents understood. When Colton got a raise, my father printed his LinkedIn post and put it on the refrigerator. When I landed my biggest client, a regional medical billing group with 14 locations, I mentioned it at Sunday dinner and my mother asked if I wanted more potatoes. The other part of it was that I had made myself useful in ways that nobody labeled correctly. My father had a rental property, a duplex he'd owned for 11 years, that he managed himself with a system that could generously be called chaos. Paper ledgers from 2019 shoved into a shoebox. Security deposit records on a spreadsheet that hadn't been updated since the second tenant moved in. No formal lease tracking, no maintenance log, no documentation of what had been repaired, when, by whom, or for how much. I had quietly rebuilt his entire record system over the course of 1 summer after he got a certified letter from a tenant threatening a small claims dispute over a deposit he couldn't prove he'd held correctly. He never mentioned it again after I fixed it. Never said thank you, exactly. He said, "Good, now I won't have to deal with that." My mother ran an Etsy shop selling custom embroidered items. Baby blankets, wedding gifts, anniversary pieces. It had started as a hobby and become something closer to a second income, except she had never filed it as a business, never tracked her materials costs properly, and had been underreporting for 3 years without realizing it. I spent a weekend helping her reconstruct her records, set up a proper bookkeeping system, and file an amended return before anything compounded into a real problem. I also rewrote her shop policies, reorganized her shipping workflow, and connected her to a supplier who charged her 40% less for the same blank goods she'd been ordering from a retail wholesaler. She told her friends at her embroidery circle that she had figured out her shop finances. Colton was the one I helped most and the one who acknowledged it least. His fiancée Petra had a side business selling handmade ceramic pieces. Mugs, bowls, small sculptural things that were genuinely beautiful and genuinely popular. She had a growing Instagram following and a wait list for custom orders. But her pricing was wrong. Her LLC was registered in the wrong state for her purposes, and she had signed a wholesale agreement with a boutique that included a clause giving the boutique first right of refusal on any future production runs at a locked price point. That clause would have strangled her business within a year. I caught it. I rewrote the pricing model, helped her file a corrected registration, and drafted a counter-proposal for the boutique that removed the problematic clause while giving them something they actually wanted, an exclusive seasonal window instead of permanent first right. They accepted. Petra cried a little and said she didn't know how she would have caught that. Colton said, "See, this is why it's good having a sister who has extra time." Extra time. I let that one go. I let that one go. I let a lot of things go. What I did not do was explain, out loud and in detail, exactly how much I was holding. Not because I was passive. Because I had learned early that competence inside my family was not a thing that earned respect. It earned more requests. So when Colton stood up at his rehearsal dinner with a microphone and a crowd and described his older sister as someone who plays pretend accountant while the rest of us work real jobs, I was not surprised. I was something colder than surprised. I was confirmed. I had the screenshots within an hour. 3 different guests had posted clips to their Instagram stories. Colton's college friends thinking it was hilarious, captioning it with variations of groom roasting his sister and "this is why we love him." One of Petra's bridesmaids had shared it with a crying, laughing emoji. 40-something people had seen it on social media who hadn't even been in the room. I watched my notifications fill up with tagged posts and reaction stickers, and I felt, underneath the heat in my face, something very clear and very practical, beginning to organize itself. I had 9 days before the wedding. I had been providing unpaid financial and operational support to 3 members of my immediate family. I was holding records, access credentials, filing timelines, and institutional knowledge that none of them had ever been asked to learn. I knew exactly what would happen if I stopped. My best friend Simone called me at 11 that night. She didn't say hello either. She said, "Tell me you didn't post anything." I told her I hadn't. She exhaled so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Simone was one of the only people who knew what my business actually looked like: the client files, the income, the waiting list, the spreadsheets, the late-night calls with attorneys when a client had a compliance question I wanted to get exactly right. She had sat on my couch and watched me work through a forensic reconciliation on a client's accounts at 2 in the morning because the error was in there somewhere and I was going to find it. "Colton has no idea what he just did," she said. "I know. Are you going to tell him?" I thought about his face at the rehearsal dinner. Confident, easy, playing to the room. The specific pleasure of someone who has never once considered that the person they're mocking might know something they don't. "Not yet," I said. The next morning, I started going through everything methodically. My father's rental property records were stored in a shared folder I had set up and maintained. I removed my editing access and transferred the folder to a read-only archive. I moved the automated reminder system I built, which flagged him when leases were up for renewal, when state-required landlord disclosures needed updating, and when his insurance certificates needed to be refiled with the city, out of the shared workflow and into a documentation file that explained what the reminders were for and how to replicate them manually. I also noted that his current lease with the second-floor tenant had a renewal window that would require a response within 3 weeks or would auto-renew at the current rate, which was $400 below market. I did not tell him any of this. My mother's Etsy shop had quarterly estimated tax payments due in 11 days. I had been the one tracking this. I had set up the reminder. I had calculated the amount based on her year-to-date sales. I removed myself from the shared spreadsheet where this information lived and saved my own copy. Then I moved my template for her materials cost tracking into my personal drive. I did not send a heads up. Petra's business was the most complicated. I'd helped her set up a project management system for tracking custom orders, a client communication template, and a recurring financial review process she did monthly. I had been her informal CFO without a title or a rate or a contract. I had the login credentials for her bookkeeping software as a backup contact. I quietly removed myself as a secondary user. Then I drafted a formal notice. It was not long. It stated that effective immediately, I would no longer be providing unpaid advisory, bookkeeping, tax preparation support, contract review, or financial operations assistance to any individual or business entity not under formal agreement with my LLC. If they wish to continue receiving services, they were welcome to contact me through my business email to request a consultation and rate sheet. I documented the hours I had contributed over the preceding 14 months. The total was 941 hours. I saved it to drafts. Then I went to bed because I had a client deliverable due the next morning and I was a professional. The wedding was in 9 days. I was still in it, maid of honor, technically, though Petra had added the title without having a real conversation about what it meant to her. I had assumed it meant I would give a toast and stand at the front and hold her bouquet during the vows. I had written a speech that was warm and true and that I intended to deliver without a single passive-aggressive syllable, because my issue was not with Petra. She had not held the microphone. Day 3 was when the first thing cracked. My mother called me, not to apologize, not to mention the rehearsal dinner at all, and said she was having a whole situation with the customer who claimed her order had never arrived. The customer had opened the case through Etsy. My mother was panicking, and she needed me to help her navigate the resolution process. I listened to her explain the problem. I said, "That sounds really stressful, Mom." And then I said I was in the middle of a client project and couldn't step away. She said, "Can't you just tell me what to do real quick?" I said, "Etsy has a seller help center with step-by-step instructions for open cases. It walks you through exactly what to submit." There was a pause. "I don't know how to find that." "It's under the help menu at the top of your seller dashboard. Just type open case response in the search bar." She sighed in a specific way she has, not frustrated exactly, more like she was performing frustration for an audience that wasn't there. "I'll figure it out," she said in a tone that meant she blamed me for making her. I went back to my client file. Day 4 was quiet on the surface. Under the surface, my father missed a deadline to respond to a maintenance request from his first-floor tenant, something I would have flagged automatically, because I had the shared calendar set to alert me 72 hours in advance. Without me watching it, the alert fired into a folder he didn't check regularly. He found it on day 5 and called the tenant 2 days late, which meant the tenant had already called the city's tenant services line to ask about their rights. I know this because my father called me on day 5 to ask if tenants could get you in trouble for late maintenance responses. I told him I wasn't sure of the specific regulations in his city and suggested he look up the local landlord-tenant ordinance or call a property management attorney. He said, "You always know this stuff." I said, "I've been doing some research lately, but I'm not current on your county specifically." He said okay and hung up, which was as close to graceful as Douglas managed under confusion. Day 5 was also the day one of Petra's wholesale customers emailed asking for a reorder form that I had designed and stored in a shared folder Petra had never actually learned to navigate. Petra texted me asking where that form thing was. I told her it was in the Google Drive folder we'd set up and gave her the folder name. She texted back 20 minutes later, "I can't find it." I told her to search the drive by file name. I gave her the file name. She said, "Can you just send it to me?" I put my phone face down and went for a walk. Not to avoid her, to give myself enough space that I could come back and make a clean decision rather than a reactive one. When I came back, I sent her the form. One time. I attached a note that said the form was also saved in the Drive folder and showed her exactly how to search for it. I was not cruel. I was simply no longer automatic. Simone came over that evening with Indian food and the energy of someone who had been waiting all week to have this conversation. "How's the countdown going?" she said, not really asking. "They're starting to notice the edges," I said. "But not why." "Not yet." She opened her container and thought for a second. "Here's what I keep thinking. Your brother didn't just embarrass you. He needed an audience. He made a public claim about your life. In front of her family, in front of his friends. He said it out loud so people would agree with him." I know. So the answer isn't private. It can't be. I had been thinking the same thing. Day 6. Petra called me, not texted, which meant the ceramic thing had escalated. She had 2 custom orders overdue because she'd mixed up her production timeline and the holiday shipping window was closing faster than she'd realized. She needed to know if she could push both customers or if one of them had a deadline clause in their order confirmation. I knew the answer. I had written the order confirmation template. I knew which version she was using and what it said. I told her I'd need to look into it and get back to her. You don't know off the top of your head? She said, surprised. I've been stepping back from the administrative side of things, I said. I want to make sure you have the information in a way you can use going forward, not just from me telling you. There was a silence that I think confused her. She wasn't unkind, Petra. She had just never considered the structure she was standing on because it had always been invisible. Day 7, my brother texted me for the first time since the rehearsal dinner. Not to apologize. To ask if I could look over the rental agreement he and Petra were signing for their new apartment, because it was kind of long, and he wanted to make sure it was standard. I read that text 3 times. The audacity of it wasn't even malicious. That was the thing that got me. It wasn't that he was cruel and knew it. He genuinely could not connect the version of me he'd mocked 5 days earlier with the version he was reaching for right now. To him, they were different functions. The one he dismissed and the one he needed were filed in separate categories, and it didn't occur to him that they were the same person. I did not respond. An hour later, it's like 40 pages, LOL. Can you just flag anything weird? I turned my phone over and worked on a client's quarterly review for 2 hours. He called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave one. Day 8. My mother's quarterly estimated tax payment was due the next day. She hadn't made one yet. I know this because she called me at 7 in the morning in a voice that was trying to be calm and failing. I got an email from the IRS, she said. It wasn't from the IRS. It was a reminder from the tax software I'd set up for her, sent to an email she rarely checked, which she had now found. But the logo on the email looked official, and she had spiraled before reading past the first paragraph. I explained what the email actually was. I explained what a quarterly estimated payment was and why she owed one. I explained that missing it wasn't catastrophic but would result in a small penalty if she didn't pay by the deadline. She said, "How do I pay it?" I told her. Step by step. I stayed on the phone while she navigated through it. When it was done, she said, "This is so complicated. I don't know why it has to be this complicated." I did not say, "It is not complicated. I just always did it for you, so it never felt complicated to you." I said, "You did it. You're all set now." She said, "Thank you." And then, after a pause, "You know I love you." I said I knew. She did not mention the rehearsal dinner. That night, I took out my phone and looked at the clips that were still sitting in my social media notifications. The Instagram stories had mostly expired, but one of Colton's friends had posted a longer version to a Facebook account, and it had gathered comments, mostly from people who found it funny, a few who seemed to find it edgy in that specific way people enjoy when they're not the one being pointed at. One comment, from someone I didn't recognize, said, "Bro really aired out his sister at his own rehearsal dinner? Legend." Another said, "She looks so unbothered, although she might actually be unbothered." I was, actually. Not in the detached way, not in the numb way. In the way where you've made a decision, and the decision has made you calmer than anything else could. I went back to my drafts. At 11:47 that night, I sent the formal notice from my LLC to 3 email addresses. My father's personal email, my mother's Etsy business email, and Colton's personal email with Petra CC'd, because she was a business relationship, not a peripheral one. I attached the hour log, I attached a rate sheet, I attached a single line at the bottom that said, "This notice does not affect my attendance at or participation in the upcoming wedding." That was intentional. I did not want them to confuse the professional with the personal, even though they had never bothered to tell the difference before. I went to sleep. I woke up to 11 missed calls, 26 texts, and a voicemail from my mother that started composed and ended somewhere near a complete unraveling. My father's texts came in the voice of a man who believed authority could reverse a documented decision. "What is this?" Then, "Call me." Then, 8 minutes later, "This is not how family works." Then, 40 minutes after that, quieter. "The least thing is a problem." The tenant called again. Colton's texts were the most revealing because they went through 4 distinct phases in under 3 hours. First, confusion. "Did you really send this?" Then, defensiveness. "I was kidding at dinner, everyone knew that." Then, something closer to actual alarm. "Petra says she can't find anything in her system. What did you do?" Then, finally, just before 7 in the morning, "We need to talk." We did. But not yet. Petra sent a separate email which told me she understood the situation more clearly than Colton did. She didn't CC him. She wrote that she understood if I felt my contributions had been undervalued. She said she would like to schedule a call to discuss a formal arrangement. She used the word arrangement correctly and without sarcasm, which made me respect her more than I had the week before. I flagged her email to respond to first. The wedding was the next day. My mother called 4 more times between 6 and noon. By the third call, she had moved past shock into something that sounded like genuine reckoning, which I had not expected from her this quickly. She said she had found the Etsy seller help center. She had resolved the open case herself. She said she didn't realize how many of the things she'd been doing, or not doing, I had been quietly handling. I thought you were just around, she said. I thought you were available. I never thought of it as work you were doing for us. I let that sit for a moment. That's because I never made you think of it that way, I said. That's partly on me. But what Colton said, in front of all those people, that wasn't a joke I could let pass. She was quiet. Then, I know. Those 2 words from my mother cost her something. I could hear it. I'll talk to him, she said. I know you will, I said. But I need him to talk to me. He did eventually. 2 hours before the wedding ceremony, in the parking lot of the venue, which was not where I would have chosen to have this conversation, but was apparently where we were having it. He looked like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. He had that specific expression of someone who has just discovered that a machine they never paid attention to has been running their life, and the machine has a person inside it. I didn't think it was a big deal, he said. I know you didn't. The toast, I was trying to be funny. You were, I said. That's the part that made it worse. You were funny. People laughed. And the thing you were being funny about was a lie you've been telling for 4 years. And everyone in that room believed it because you said it with confidence. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you actually make? Not what do you do? Not what is your business? What do you make? It was such a specific question. Like the only way he could recalibrate was through a number. I told him. He looked at the pavement for a long time. Then he looked up. I think I've been an idiot, he said. You've been comfortable, I said. It's not the same thing, but it's close. The ceremony was beautiful. I held Petra's bouquet and I did not cry, which surprised me. My toast was warm and true, and I meant every word of it, because I had written it before any of this happened, and nothing that came after changed the fact that Petra was kind and that Colton, despite everything, loved her genuinely. I can hold 2 things at once. I've always been able to. The reception was different. There was a quality to the room that hadn't been there at the rehearsal dinner, a kind of careful energy, people not quite sure what the dynamic was between the siblings standing on either side of the head table. Colton's college friends who had posted the clips were notably quieter. One of them came up to me near the end of the night and said, awkwardly, that the toast had been really great. I thanked him and let the silence do the rest. My father found me near the cake table. He was holding a glass of something amber, and he had the look he gets when he's tried to be indirect and run out of road. The tenant situation is going to need some attention, he said. I know, I said. I documented everything. The folder is current. You can navigate it. It's organized by year and property. I don't know those systems like you do. I know. That's what the rate sheet is for. He looked at his glass for a moment. Is that how it is now? It's how it's going to work, yes. Even for family. Especially for family, I said. Because that's the relationship where people are most likely to assume the work is free. He nodded slowly. Not agreement exactly. Something that acknowledged he'd heard me, which from my father was close enough to a start. Over the following weeks, things reorganized themselves into something I hadn't had before. Clarity. My father signed a limited scope agreement for quarterly reviews of his rental records and the lease renewal consultation. He paid the first invoice on time, which felt significant in a way I didn't have words for. My mother hired a part-time virtual assistant to manage her Etsy order fulfillment, someone who actually wanted to do that work and was compensated for it. And I helped her onboard the assistant properly during one paid session that we documented with a formal scope letter. Colton and Petra signed a formal agreement for ongoing financial advisory services for her ceramic business. It was Petra's idea. She had sent me the follow-up email the morning after the wedding, calm and professional, asking for a rate and a scope. Colton's name was on the agreement because they were now married and the business was partly his concern. He did not say much during the onboarding call, but he paid attention. I did not help with the apartment lease review. Some things I let go, not out of spite, just out of clarity about what I could give and what I needed to hold back. Simone asked me, about 3 weeks later, whether I felt like I'd gotten what I wanted. I wanted them to understand what they dismissed, I said. Do they? I thought about my father's face in the parking lot of the venue, my mother's voice on the phone when she said those 2 words, Colton looking at the pavement. They understand that it was real, I said. Whether they understand what it cost me, I'm not sure, but that's their work to do. Simone nodded. And you? I looked around my apartment. Both monitors on, client files open, whiteboard with a new set of timelines for a new quarter, everything ordered and mine and earned. I'm good, I said. And I meant it completely. There's something people don't tell you about spending years being invisible in your own family. It's not just the exhaustion. It's the slow accumulation of believing, somewhere underneath everything, that maybe they're right. Maybe this doesn't count. Maybe real work looks different. Maybe I should be grateful they let me contribute at all. The moment that belief breaks is not loud. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or a dramatic confrontation. It arrives in a parking lot at a rehearsal dinner at the bottom of an email you send at 11:47 at night, quiet and documented and professional. It arrives when you realize the only person who had ever truly dismissed your work was you, every time you let someone else do it for free. I keep coming back to one moment, not the rehearsal dinner, not the parking lot conversation, the moment 3 weeks later when my father paid his first invoice on time and didn't say anything about it, just paid it like a client, like someone who understood the transaction. And I sat at my desk for a few minutes doing nothing, just feeling the specific quiet of that. It took me a long time to understand why that moment hit harder than the apologies did. I think it's because actions are honest in a way that words aren't. Words can be performed. Words can be shaped to the audience, softened at the edges, given the right amount of emotion to get the response you're looking for. But paying an invoice on time, without complaint, without negotiating it down to a favor, that's a person doing the thing they said they would do when there's no applause for doing it. That's character. It's quiet and unglamorous, and it matters more than almost anything else. What I learned from all of this, slowly and only because I was forced to, is that there are 3 things that determine how your life actually goes, underneath all the noise. Not the things people say about you at rehearsal dinners. Not the LinkedIn metrics or the company car or whose name is on a placard. The first is whether you do right by people even when it costs you something. I had been doing that for years inside my family, doing right by them quietly, without recognition. And somewhere along the way, I confused that with allowing them to take. Those are not the same thing. Doing right by people means acting with integrity. It does not mean absorbing disrespect as the price of admission. The second is whether you actually understand what you're doing and why. I had the knowledge, I had built the systems, read the contracts, caught the errors, understood the timelines. But for years I had used that knowledge in service of other people's comfort and called it hopefulness, when really it was a way of staying small enough that nobody would resent me for being capable. Intelligence isn't only about what you know. It's about being willing to see clearly, including the parts of yourself that have been making quiet agreements with the wrong situations. The third is whether you can hold steady when things get hard, not dramatic hard, ordinary hard. The kind where someone you love mocks you in front of 60 people and you don't post anything. Where a sibling texts, "Can you just check this real quick?" 2 days after using you as a punchline and you put your phone down and go for a walk instead of answering. Where your mother says, "I don't know how to find that," and you give her the directions instead of just doing it for her. That kind of steadiness, the kind that isn't loud, that doesn't perform itself, is the thing that actually changes the outcome. Not the anger, not the confrontation. The stillness inside the decision. Colton had talent and confidence and a job that looked the way jobs are supposed to look. He had all of that, and he still needed me, because what he didn't have was the quiet, daily discipline of doing the thing correctly, even when nobody was watching. That is what I had been doing for years. Alone, in a converted spare bedroom with 2 monitors and a whiteboard and clients in 4 states who trusted me completely. The room may have laughed at the rehearsal dinner. 9 days later, they were calling in silence. That is not luck. That is not coincidence. That is cause and effect playing out exactly the way it always does, patient and indifferent and right on schedule. I'm not interested in being owed anything anymore. What I'm interested in is building something so solid that it speaks for itself, and knowing finally that I'm the one who gets to define what that looks like.